Good afternoon. Welcome to the final session of the 6th Annual Voorhees Economic Development Incentives Conference. My name is Scott Zients. I lead our national incentives practice, and we're so glad you've been able to join us this week. We're really looking forward, though, to having you next year to gather in person again, shake hands with our friends, and really talk economic development in person in Columbus. Before you sign off today, please remember to fill out your survey and give us ideas, if you will, for next year. We look at those whenever we figure out what we're going to put on the agenda. Without anything further, I'm going to turn it over to Sean for this great wrapping up presentation. Thanks all.
Thanks, Scott. Really appreciate it, and appreciate this opportunity to bring our audience four absolutely stellar economic development leaders. Sebastian Alias is CEO at Missouri Partnership. He's coming up on his 10th anniversary at Missouri Partnership, and we're fortunate to have him here, as well as Chris Chung, who some of you may recall from prior VEDIC sessions. Chris is CEO at the Economic Development Partnership of North Carolina, and previously worked with Sebastian in Missouri. Next, we have Justin Heather, who is Deputy Director of Business Development for the Department of Commerce and Economic Opportunity in Illinois. And last but not least, we have Tim Vanderhoof, who is Senior Vice President of Business Development for Enterprise Florida. I can't imagine a better panel to talk about what's going on in economic development today with so many different perspectives, and want to go ahead. Please take a close look at their bios. They're all amazing. They're in your PowerPoint, but I want to go ahead and just jump right in to our questions. So to get started, I want to talk a little bit about what changes in economic development has the pandemic accelerated. So earlier today, we heard from Kroger, and Rita told us about how their partnership with Ocado has really grown and taken off with the acceleration of home delivery for groceries and in integration into our into the economy much faster than had been anticipated. And was curious, wanted to talk to this team about what they're seeing around the country. So, Sebastian, I guess we'll start with you in Missouri and go alphabetically. We'll start with you. What changes in economic development have you seen the pandemic accelerate?
Yeah, Sean, thanks for having me. Really appreciate the opportunity to speak to the group and be on this panel. I would say, similar to what you said about Kroger, we're seeing a major increase in e-commerce projects. So, being in the middle of the country, we tend to see a lot of projects like that. In fact, if you recall, the national emergency was March 13th of 2020. Like 2 weeks later, we got a call about Chewy.com. They were looking for a new distribution center. And we thought, how can this be happening when supposedly the whole economy has come to a screeching halt and we've got this major project? But they were looking to site a 1,200-person distribution center. And they told us later, which we won that in the suburbs of Kansas City in Belton, that project wasn't supposed to start until maybe another year or so. But because of just the increase of e-commerce, on top of that, there was actually an increase in pet adoptions too, which is fantastic. But they probably had to move up that project on their timeline because of the pandemic and because of the increase of just e-commerce and less retail shopping. But we've also seen a lot of food processing. I would say that's probably the largest share of our new projects are food processing. Some of the folks are telling us that some of the supply chain risk and has enabled them to kind of look at their platforms and look at their footprints of manufacturing plants, and it accelerated that too. So food tends to be recession proof, and we saw a lot of activity around food as well.
And that's great. And Chris, how about North Carolina? What are you seeing there?
So I'd first echo Subhash's comments about distribution fulfillment activities support e-commerce buying. I think that is a prime example of consumer behavior that the pandemic has really helped to accelerate, right? I mean, I think everybody was buying things online before, but just in a pandemic where we're hesitant or not able to go into a bricks and mortar store, of course, e-commerce becomes that much more prevalent, and all the space necessary to support that becomes that much more critical. I think some of the things that we've seen here in North Carolina, life sciences, that is a huge part of the economic foundation in our state. Everything from pharmaceutical manufacturing to gene therapy to biotechnology research and development. That has been a real area of strength for business recruitment and economic investment in general over the past year. Whether some of that's being driven by the pandemic, whether that's more just a pandemic maybe calls greater attention to investing in companies and technologies that can improve the human condition from a medical standpoint. Whatever it is, that has gone from probably it's double or triple the proportion relative to our total share of projects that we're working on in the state. And then, office projects are an area where maybe we're seeing some effects, but maybe not all positive, right? I mean, I think people were striving or looking for more of a flexible work arrangement before the pandemic. Obviously, the past year has forced many of us who have been office bound traditionally to have greater flexibility, work from home a lot more. And I think that's changing sort of what companies are looking for in terms of what the office workplace looks like. How big does it need to be? And of course, that translates into changes in the types of economic development deals that we might be chasing here in North Carolina, which historically have included, corporate headquarters relocations and other office expansions. We may see fewer of those, or they may look very different than they did pre-pandemic.
That's interesting. Justin, what are you seeing from the Illinois perspective?
Well, there's definitely a theme here, and that's on the distribution of fulfillment centers has actually accelerated quite a bit. We knew companies, we've been in conversations with the companies that were expanding, but they have clearly accelerated their time frame. And I think a part of that is, back to Saban's point, was, the disruption to the supply chain. And we talk about reshoring, and it's noted here, but reshoring also has a different aspect of just shortening that supply chain. So we've seen several of our deals talk about, well, our suppliers are in California or in Texas, and with the disruption of the supply chain, we need our product closer to our manufacturing facility or whatnot. So we've seen a lot of the idea of shortening the supply chain, and that has led to further development that, is a reshoring or an onshoring of some of the activities that were spread throughout the states themselves. So we're seeing a lot more of that shortening. And I think one thing that has brought to, sort of Chris's point is the concept of remote work. We had all been started to work on that and think about remote work and especially what it meant for tax incentives and how we are able to lure businesses to our respective regions. And now let's brought that to the fore, where now we're not only talking about, remote working, say 2 days a week or the 9 on, 1 off type of idea, but that where folks were literally only in the office once a quarter. And what do we do? And does it matter whether the person is living in Florida or California if they're able to do the exact same work that they would if they're in Oak Brook, 15 minutes from the office? And I don't know that anybody has that answer quite yet, but, it's really accelerated that discussion of what does remote work mean in the world of economic incentives and actually increasing employment in your region when so many folks are so far flung.
Yeah, and that's interesting. I think, Tim, I'm curious for your perspective on that, because I think Florida's probably faced both sides of that issue, where people are able to work remotely in Florida, which is, from a climate standpoint, especially facing the snow that we've got right now, very attractive. But at the same time, a lot of Florida's business has been, driven, terrific tourism industry and everything like that. What are you seeing down in Florida? think you're still on mute.
That's what happens when you go last. Thanks, Sean. I think, obviously I'm going to echo the sentiment of my colleagues before me. I think, clearly e-commerce has picked up exponentially across the board and across all of the geography. And to Chris's point earlier, life sciences is in Florida as well, a key industry that we have a lot of transactional volume. I think what we were seeing, really early on was a lot of PPE manufacturing. Whether it was converting existing facilities and other manufacturing operations, or folks that were relocating or actually onshoring. We had 2 Southeast Asian companies come over that were doing N95 masks. So that was something that happened really at the blink of an eye. But to your point about flex space, we've probably seen more of that in the last 5 to 7 years. Where folks can work remotely. But what really changed during the pandemic for us was companies now reaching out to us saying, look, we're trying to figure this out ourselves. Work with us and tell us what this could look like in Florida. So we really had to kind of put our thinking caps on and talking about even restructuring our incentive programs to be able to meet the needs of the client. So instead of a very strict amount of jobs in a specific location or municipality, now it's more of okay, we can get there so long as they are located in Florida, so long as they're sitting in front of a laptop in one of our 67 counties. And I think that's helped us, really kind of take advantage of what is going on, not only from a climate standpoint and a tax standpoint, but a COVID standpoint.
I see Chris nodding. Chris, are you seeing changes programmatically as well due to the pandemic?
I think Justin brought up the point about incentives and whether and how much they're applicable to remote workforce. I don't know that we've gone down that path as much here. I know, like many states, we offered some forbearance for companies under their incentive agreements at the beginning of the pandemic, recognizing that something as disruptive as this would cause most companies to have to adjust their timetable for meeting those hiring obligations. But Justin's point about how I think this was even an issue. Some of us who do this work at a state level, network of state economic development executives who periodically get together and talk about big picture issues affecting the industry. And I remember that the conversation had been around, what do we do about remote workers? And this was a year, 6 months before the pandemic. So clearly it was already something that was coming into play. The pandemic, I think, just forced more state policymakers to think about, well, how do we capitalize on this trend, still incentivize that job creation, even if it looks a little different than the traditional ribbon cutting or groundbreaking that we're used to seeing with something like an office moving in.
Thanks. Thanks very much. Justin, have you seen you mentioned, sort of the focus on the supply chain and focus on the reshoring. Have you looked at adopting new programs or just trying to work within the programs you had to take into account the changes?
Yeah, we've really sort of at present used our existing programs, but like many states, we have things like the but-for provisions where it's, but for this incentive, we would locate in some other state or whatnot. And it definitely raises a very serious concern when you have a project where the, tier one suppliers or whatnot want to be close to the manufacturing base. And, really, is the but-for satisfied? Do they have to be here? And I think that's going to pose challenges long-term as we continue to evaluate projects where they're looking for incentives that are geared towards the idea of need to be closer and shorten that supply chain. I think it's going to cause, we haven't dealt with that issue really in such a blunt way, but at some point I do believe one of these projects is going to raise that in a very transparent way that we're all going to have to struggle with and bring in the lawyers and sort of hash it out.
You don't want the lawyers, but
No, not all.
Subhash, you mentioned your success in attracting Chewy and that huge project, which was a big win for Missouri. Can you talk a little bit about changes you've seen in attracting business with the pandemic? With the limited travel, are you seeing more virtual site visits? Are people still traveling for site visits? Because it sounds like there's still projects going forward.
Yeah, we're So obviously the world sort of shut down there right at the beginning of the pandemic. We saw a lot of virtual site visits. We had I'd like to claim that it's probably the first in-person site visit in the country was May 15th. We were all pretty skittish about it, but it was driven by a site location consultant, and they've since been in the state 6 times. So on the one hand, while they are virtual, we also would probably say we had more of them. So we would have many more conversations with the site consultant, sitting around our computers and reviewing maps and topos and whatnot. So our engagement was probably more frequent. The quality wasn't there. But there are a lot of consultants that sort of already took this path of doing virtual site visits. And so I think that's something that we're going to be seeing long term. And we've looked into some of our own tools to help augment and make those more successful down the road.
So I'm going to let Justin, Tim, and Chris, if you want to weigh in on that. Otherwise, I'll let whoever wants to jump in right now. Otherwise, I'm going to kind of move to our next slide and our next set of questions.
I mean, I'll chime in briefly. I think one thing that's been harder for the past year, again, many of the states on here, the way that we get the chance to compete for these deals is we're contacted through firms like Voorhees or site selection consultants or the companies that directly, and that's great. I think North Carolina, we've always been fortunate to be on that initial list, but that doesn't mean we don't typically try to shake the bushes and find those other companies that may not have an RFP out there today, but they're thinking about a major expansion or relocation. We want to get to them before they open up that process. And that prospecting piece, that's been a lot more difficult because that typically relies on being at industry events or traveling out of market to visit companies one-on-one to have conversations about their future growth plans. That's been the hardest part to try to replicate in a virtual setting. I think we've still seen good deal flow coming in, but we haven't been able to generate as much of that deal flow as we typically would because we've been constrained by travel in this pandemic world.
Well, Chris, thanks. I'm going to go ahead and say that was a terrific transition into our next question, which is for this year, for 2021, as we look ahead. What are you forecasting for budget and program implications of this new year? Have you seen budget changes? Are programs being reduced? Or how are different programs impacting you? And what do you see rolling out this year in particular? We'll go ahead and let Tim get us started on that one.
Sure. I think, we really have not seen a reduction. We're getting ready to start legislative session next month, and we are slated to get our same operating budget. All the programs are supposed to be budgeted at the same level they have historically been. So that's all good news. And I think that really is, the legislative body understanding we're operating in different times. So even if we needed to cut budget items, it's not going to be out of economic development because that is such a critical piece of the puzzle to get us back to where we were. And I think that goes for probably everybody on this panel. New programs, I would say quasi-new programs, Sean, and that being we last session, allowed one of our flagship programs, our QTI program, to sunset. That program is looking promising to come back. It's got a Senate bill and a House bill sponsor. And from what we're hearing and understanding across the hall, that this is going to pass and kind of bring back what we lost. So we were at a loss for about 12 months, and I'm sure Chris was applauding that as the Business Journal said. And Chris, thanks again, because I think you really were the impetus to helping us get it back. So I would say from a new program front, that's really it, is getting what we once had back and able to compete again. So we're very fortunate that we're not seeing any reductions.
That's great. And I'll let Chris tell you you're welcome. Chris?
Yes, you are. You're welcome, Tim. In all seriousness, I think same situation. Budget-wise, some of that's just there's been a bit of a budget stalemate the past couple of years here. We have divided control of government between the legislature and the executive. But even in spite of that, I think both the one-time infusion of federal COVID relief dollars last year, as well as just, again, better overall economic performance than most folks would thought at the beginning of the pandemic, has meant that at least this coming budget year that starts on July 1st, I have not heard any cause for concern, and if anything, the revenue picture looks a lot better. There may be some dispute around what we want to fund when it comes to economic development, though. There's been a lot of pressure to support small business, Main Street business, the tourism industry, some of these sectors that have really been hammered hard by the effects of the pandemic and have traditionally not been the focus of a lot of economic development programs, tax incentives and whatnot. There may be some talk about how do we direct some of that spending to lift up those most impacted sectors. But like anything else, that's also going to be a bit of a trade-off conversation from a policy standpoint.
Definitely. And that's something we're seeing here. I can share that. That's something we're seeing here in Ohio, too. There's been a big push on small business, on supporting restaurants and bars, a big push on trying to more effectively support, trying to take different approaches to tourism as far as the types of support for tourism businesses, rather than just sort of advertise Ohio, but to specifically support tourism. And there's also been a big focus on, minority business enterprises, women business enterprises, veteran business enterprises, and really trying to spend more effort, energy, and support, financial support for those businesses with new programs this year. Justin, what are you seeing in Illinois?
Well, it's a bit of a mixed bag, I would say. We've had structural issues with our budget for years. And, Chris, we had I think the longest budget impasse in history a few years ago when it was Governor Browner was in office. So I definitely know your travails there. We had three new programs that came online or were approved in 2019. One was a data centers program. Another was an apprenticeship program. And both of those went live in 2019 and 2020 and have been very productive and gaining steam. The third one was something we call the Blue Collar Jobs Act, and that was an incentive that was on top of a few other programs that would incentivize construction work and through credits. And the governor this year, earlier in January when the program was supposed to go live, and then earlier this week in his state budget address, did state that he wanted to delay implementation of that program, and has even suggested potential rollback as part of the budget negotiation process this spring. So that program was impacted and has been delayed, but I don't know that is a signal towards necessarily decreasing what we're doing economic development wise. We have had several different sort of ideas of restrictions on budgets, but they haven't affected our economic development. And it's more pivoting towards what folks here are talking about, the smaller companies and other businesses most directly impacted by the pandemic.
And Subhash, what's Missouri looking at?
Yeah, I'll kind of, sounds like there's some common themes from the other states. First, we had some program areas. We're going through the appropriations process right now. So some program areas are looking like they may get increased, some may get cut. At the same time, I think Chris mentioned the CARES funding. That was a substantial increase to the budget last year. The bulk of that for economic development is going to small business for the small business grant program. This is the difference between a company being able to keep the lights on or go out of business. There was sort of a very big push for sort of that emergency recovery for those industries. For our organization, so we're separate from the state. We're a public-private partnership. We're very fortunate. Again, we're all going through the appropriations process, but our budget appears to be intact as well. So that's great to hear from my colleagues around the country that economic development is still considered to be a high priority, as it is in Missouri.
That's great. Are you, from trying to transition now, I think, into a little bit of a discussion on some of the specific programs and specific emphasis that we've seen in Ohio in the last, really probably going back to the current administration in Ohio. There's been an incredible focus on workforce development, on training, and other programs like that. I understand that that's going to vary by different types of entities, and in Ohio it's being done by both development and by higher education and other groups working together. Wanted to get a sense from all of you. Do you anticipate that as a major focus? Is that currently a big focus for expenditures? Is it? Have you seen an increase in that? Do you expect that to continue? And Sebastian, since you're up, I'll let you get started. I know it's might be a little bit different than maybe what your organization focuses on, but go ahead.
Yeah, I'll say, since it's not necessarily in our control as Missouri Partnership, if I can get on a soapbox for a moment about workforce. So I would say, absolutely, it's going to be crucial and it's going to be important. And I fear that because we've got sort of higher unemployment rates, that people sort of think that we don't have a workforce problem. And I think couldn't be further from the truth. We've got this national skills gap, and the skills mismatch issue did not go away just because we have more people looking for work. Maybe with remote working, the talent pool got a little bit bigger, but for like manufacturing, this is all just as important. So I would add, this is the time for worker retraining. I'm hoping this is some kind of a wake-up call for some. If you talk to or read or hear about the generation born during the Great Depression, you see a mindset that grew out of that experience. I would hope that if there's a silver lining with this, this may be the opportunity for people to explore new careers if they haven't before. So, in Missouri, we've got a program called Fast Track. It enables adult learners to earn a certificate in high demand. They're that need to be in certain income brackets, but they can earn a certificate in high demand professions and at almost no cost. And that's the exact kind of program that I think we all need to be supporting, not just in Missouri, but nationally. So I'm sorry to be on the soapbox, but I feel like it's going to get lost.
No, that's great. And Tim, what are you seeing? Where are you seeing down in Florida on workforce and other areas of emphasis?
So I think what we're seeing is our sister agency, CareerSource Florida, that handles all the workforce development and training grants. They are continuing to accelerate efforts across the board. They're not just focused in one area, but I will tell you what has been really the one emphasis is on apprenticeship and vocational skill sets, because Florida, we do a good bit of manufacturing, although we're not known as a manufacturing state. Time and again, we've heard we don't have enough qualified workforce when it comes to CNC operators and welders. So they really wanted to figure out, how do we rectify that? And part of it goes back to the old way of doing things with an apprenticeship. So that program's kicking off, and from what I understand, has gone extremely well. And I think that's going to help us pivot to not just focus on these high impact sectors, the financial services, the aviation, aerospace, the much more advanced manufacturing, but getting back to some of the basic blocking and tackling for economic development that really is going to help not only the state as a whole, but our more rural and areas that have that opportunity and really need those kind of jobs in their communities.
Thanks, Tim. Justin, how about you? What have you seen on the workforce piece in Illinois?
Yeah, I think it's been, very similarly. I feel like there's been more of an emphasis when we have RFPs where we're talking to companies, more of an emphasis in the last year or so on, do you have the bodies and how quickly can I get those bodies into the role where they have the appropriate training. Obviously, every company will upskill or maybe do sort of a company-specific type of training, but they want to know how many folks you already have that are ready to go. And I think the new apprenticeship education program that we rolled out in 2020 was one of those sort of nods to the future that we definitely need to incentivize and continue to push to, for the workforce of the future. And that, to Tim's point, like everything, that covers everything from the, lower sort of developmental skills to have folks ready to enter the workforce to the advanced manufacturing where folks need to be upskilled. They have certain skill sets, but need to have those refined. And it's really covered the idea that we need to make sure that our workforce is ready for these new positions.
Thanks, Justin. Chris, from your perspective, what are you seeing in North Carolina on the workforce piece?
Yeah, I mean, a few things on workforce. I mean, I think all four of us who do this at a state level would say that the biggest issue heading into the pandemic, before we all knew COVID-19, we were all dealing to some extent with workforce challenges among our existing employers, right? It's just a skills gap, a shortage of literally warm bodies who could apply for open positions. We were all struggling with that, and along came the pandemic, and of course, unemployment spiked. But to Subhash's point, just because unemployment today is 3% higher than it was a year ago, it doesn't mean that workforce challenge has gone away. In fact, you still hear about that among companies here in North Carolina, and I suspect elsewhere, is that they still struggle to find enough qualified, skilled applicants for the positions that they're looking to hire for. It doesn't matter if it's manufacturing, construction, healthcare, IT. We're lucky in North Carolina that people continue to move here, which helps to increase the talent pool, but it's still not easy for too many companies. I think that there is, a couple observations. I don't think anyone questions that we're spending enough as a country on workforce development. When you look at the federal money, the state money, local dollars, nonprofit, there's a ton of money that gets spent on this big picture workforce development question. The problem is alignment. It's very disjointed. There's a lot of different groups all trying to solve it, and it's not all coordinated, nor necessarily could it be by one single entity that can direct all those dollars to solving the most immediate problems. And so if you're a company out there and you're looking to get some help to screen, attract, train workers, you're navigating a lot of different programs and resources and organizations that can help with that. And that probably speaks to some inefficiencies in just how the workforce development ecosystem is constructed. And then again, to Subhash's point, it is pretty good timing right now. I think a pandemic has probably shown a lot of employers that if they can automate certain functions, if they can reduce the labor component of how they conduct their businesses, and again, that could be service industries, that could be production, food processing. If you can remove the human element out of that, you are less susceptible to the impacts of a pandemic down the road. What do you do with all those people who are displaced by automation and technology? You need to get them skilled up so that they can go where there actually is hiring demand going on. But none of those are easy questions to try to solve. And I think we're all going to continue. A year from now, workforce will still be a challenge in some form or fashion for all of us, I suspect.
Are there other areas that, workforce has been a big point of emphasis with the economy, with everything, as you said, and I completely agree. I fully anticipate that workforce is going to be a high priority for years to come and going forward. I think, absolutely, it's been very hard to try to match up the companies and the employees and the skill sets. And it's just they've tried a number of different programs to do that. But that's been a challenge, and I'm sure will continue to be. Have you seen other, you mentioned that, the companies that are coming in, this is always high. A couple of you have mentioned that this is always high, workforce is always high up on their priority list. Have you seen other things that are high up, maybe higher up on the priority list that in the RFPs than you expected? I know for a number of projects I've worked on recently, green energy, for instance, has been a high priority item, and support of green energy or neutral, project neutral basis. Have you seen that as well? And do you see an increase in that, or are there other areas that, I know, in some areas it's been, is there affordable housing available and things like that? What else are you guys seeing on that? I'm curious to see what else you are from your end looking at those RFPs. I'm going to go ahead and, Chris, since you're on my screen anyway, your face is you're still up, so I'll go ahead and let you get started on that one.
Yeah, I mean, no doubt talent is still probably the biggest factor that's driving a lot of these location decisions by companies, either on where to expand or where to locate to. But as I think about other issues that maybe weren't as salient 5-10 years ago in this industry, like you said, sustainability is increasingly going to be one of those issues. Look at what happened in Texas this week. I'm sure that that's going to drive some companies to think a little differently around how is your energy infrastructure set up, how redundant, resilient are you? And of course, to the extent that events like what happened in Texas are tied in with broader issues around climate change and warming temperatures, every company that does risk management is going to have to factor in something to gauge that potential. I think issues around diversity and social justice, again, it wasn't just this spring when these issues were coming into prominence for most people. I think companies have been thinking more about that in recent years. And so what is the best proxy measure for things like that to ensure that, especially if you're in technology or you're certain industry sectors where the type of talent you're trying to recruit is going to care about those societal values, well, how do you pick a location that aligns with that preference among your future employees? And again, these are also difficult things to try to measure the same way you would utility costs or taxes, but I suspect they're going to be increasingly important for a lot of companies we all deal with. No, Sean, I think you're on mute.
There we go. Yes, I was just going to hand it over to Subhash for any insights on that same topic from what he's seen on RFPs. Thanks.
Yeah, I would agree with everything Chris said. I think just like anything, these decisions tend to be a deal where they weigh and score certain factors based on what that need is of that particular company. The social issues with social impact, with diversity and inclusion, that tends to feed right back into that talent conversation and workforce talent conversation. Employees want to go and work for employers that have diversity plans and have a social impact, as well as they're environmentally conscious. So I would say those are two themes the green energy. Those are two themes that we've seen probably emerge more recently than kind of the traditional real estate conversation, which we see that's quite a bit as a real estate conversation. We see a lot of companies with interest in heavy power usage in Missouri, and the whole green energy concept is part of their strategy and portfolio, and they ask us about our green strategy and portfolio. So we're seeing all that, and the green energy has probably been the most recent increased activity because of the energy intensive projects that we're seeing.
That's interesting. Justin, how about you? What are you seeing in Illinois?
Well, I think absolutely. With respect to green energy, I mean, some of the RFPs we have responded to in the last year, it didn't outright say it, but I felt like a lot of the RFPs were very much along the lines that if you cannot demonstrate not only existing dedication to green energy, but future commitments and long-term infrastructure improvements meant to increase green energy usage and make sure the right energy mix is there and aligned with our corporate policies, that you're just not even really in the consideration or in the running for this RFP. It wasn't blunt, but you could just tell with how it was themed that we want a state that shares our values and our commitment to green energy. And so that was something that has really come to bear. And some of the projects, especially outside of Chicago, what we've seen is the affordable housing or, housing mix that allows the community to attract millennials or younger workforce that wants to have that quality of place when they move to somewhere outside of one of the larger metropolis. And the pandemic, I think, has accelerated a bit of that as we see office space in downtown become more vacant and more folks either commuting, working remotely, but in the suburbs as opposed to those that were more concentrated in downtown has just accelerated that quality of place and those sorts of initiatives that we're seeing in the RFPs, or at least, even in the informal discussions you're having with companies. That, if I bring folks in, do they want to live there? Do they want to be there? Since so much of your time is spent in the office is now actually spent at home, do they want to be there?
That's great. Tim, can you share for Florida what you're seeing on the RFP side?
Yeah, I think similar to my colleagues, when we're receiving these RFPs and sometimes, Chris is getting the same RFP I'm getting, well, a lot of that information is just being spread across the country. I think the one significant one is around, going green. We see time and again requirements for a company saying that they want to be carbon neutral by X date, setting up operations or being, commencing operations. And, what is that going to look like? How is your utility provider going to help with that? How is the municipality going to help with that? So I think that kind of, at least for Florida, that's kind of been the leading change agent that we've seen. And we're very fortunate to have two of the biggest utilities in our state, both Duke and Florida Power and Light, that have these programs and have recognized probably a couple of years ago the importance of that and really putting those programs in place. So I would say that's first and foremost for us. And really, the other focus goes back to a topic we talked about earlier, which is more of that remote working. We're seeing those requirements where square footage, at least in Florida, has really decreased on office space. And not so much industrial and commercial, but certainly on the office space piece. That has changed, and I would say that was predominantly the last 6 months that we're seeing that, where requirements are going from maybe 50 or 100,000 square feet to now 25 or 50, and now we're having to pivot and look at that. It's one of those where, especially in Florida, as much construction as we have going on, we do a lot of spec building based on what we know, and now that's changing midstream. So developers are now having to pivot, and so are municipalities on what they're going to zone and what they're going to put up. So that change, though, I think is still going to be ongoing for another, at least another couple of years. And I think it's going to continue to pivot and change on us. I don't think we're going to have an answer or solution, and we're going to continue to see these within these RFPs. So it's a nice change, I think, in a way. It keeps us certainly on our toes on figuring out how we can find solutions for prospective clients. But at the same time, it can be really challenging to have to combat this to still try to win a deal.
Absolutely. I'm going to take advantage of a couple excellent questions from our audience and sprinkle them in now. And I actually think that I was trying to figure out which, what order to take them in and when to do them and so forth. But I think I think that this is a good time for them. The first question was, in response to one of the things you said about work from anywhere, more work from home, opportunities and things. Have any of you or your jurisdictions thought about incentivizing individuals post-pandemic, to work from anywhere? I know the question you point out that Hawaii, I think, has a program like that. Have you guys thought about that from a programmatic standpoint? incentivizing rather than incentivizing the companies per se, incentivizing also having programmatic program opportunities for attracting people as much as anything else. Tim, since you're up, we'll let you get started with that.
Sure. I think, that would be a challenge for us. And I think one of those would be just the optics of it. So Florida, pre-pandemic, we were seeing about 1,000 net new residents each and every day. During the pandemic, we, had a lull in there, but now that we're seeing it start to uptick, and a lot of that is due to obviously some of the tax legislation that has passed in some of my peers up north. And also COVID. I think where Florida had loosened restrictions and the governor went to phase 3 a few months ago to open up the state, we've seen a significant uptick in people. In fact, we see, I get time and time again, I get calls from consultants saying, hey, I'm not in Chicago. I'm working in Naples for the next 2 weeks because I don't need to be here. So I think for us to incentivize an individual is going to be a challenge. Because we still have to look at the net benefit to the state, not only from a capital investment, but that jobs perspective, that spend perspective. So I think, it would take a really long time to get that rationale across to decision makers and up to Tallahassee in order to make that happen. So I don't see that happening anytime soon in Florida.
How about Justin in Illinois?
Yeah,
do you see that as a possibility?
A possibility, yes. There was actually a bill that was filed last week that I reviewed over the weekend where it was meant to do exactly that, is provide a grant to the individual to move to Illinois. And I think that is both a factor of the remote work option, but also a little bit to help combat the out-migration we've seen in Illinois over the last decade or so. I don't know how realistic it will be as we struggle in the sort of still under the auspices of the pandemic and recovery. If that will be something that does come to fruition this spring, but there's already been those conversations, and of course, many states have or localities tend to have examples of, if you move here, we can offer you money or some other benefits. And I think I don't want to say it's a race to the bottom, but being careful of being fiscally responsible is going to be a challenge for a state like Illinois, which is currently trying to balance the budget. And I think everyone's struggling with that as tax returns and income and revenues have been down during the pandemic.
Understood. Subhash, I know it's a little outside your bailiwick and your responsibilities for Missouri, but what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, let me start with, these opinions are my own. So we during the pandemic, we kind of joined a task force within the state to kind of look at what could we do to sort of spur the growth of the most promising industries. And this was a concept that came up. Other communities have done it, and that's about as far as it got. I mean, it came up, we talked about it, but I don't see it having much traction. I love the idea. The mechanics of it are probably something else, but I applaud the communities that can make it work. The other thing is that maybe it's something that could happen at the local level. I just don't know that I would see this happening at the state level.
Thanks. And Chris, your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, there's been a couple precedents like this. I think Kansas had one for rural areas. Vermont has had a worker attraction incentive on the books for a while, but they tend to be areas that have been suffering depopulation for a long time, and it's a way, like one of the other panelists said, to juice population growth in areas that haven't had much luck with that. I don't think North Carolina needs to do that. Very similar boat to Florida. I mean, we're one of the faster growing states in the country just in terms of in-migration. But I do think, state governments, through the policies they set around how well they fund their schools, how much they invest in healthcare, infrastructure, tax rates, they are essentially trying to make their states more attractive for people to live. So just because they don't incentivize it, it doesn't mean that their policy decisions don't have some impact on the attractiveness of their states as a place to go. But ultimately, I do think you may see it with some rural communities that want to try to attract population from a more crowded metro region in their state to relocate there for cheaper housing, the ability to remote work. But yeah, I frankly don't see it happening in North Carolina. Now, that's a different question. We may market to that remote worker population, trying to get them to consider moving to North Carolina instead of Texas or Florida or Georgia, but it's a different thing than actually paying them cash to do so.
Great, thanks for sharing those perspectives on that. I got another audience question that I think it's timely to tackle, sort of as we get to our final sort of slide of what does economic development look like going forward. The question is, what are the project pipelines for each of you, for each of your agencies, and how close to pre-COVID levels are your pipelines? And for the types of projects that have slowed down during the pandemic, what kinds of stuff do you expect to come back strong? So, Chris, since you were the last, we'll go ahead and start with you and go from there.
Yeah, so the pipeline, I think as of yesterday, we're sitting at 178 projects, expansion and recruitment deals, and that compares to about 200 a year ago. So we're not all that far off. Obviously, deals come in and out of the pipeline through announcements, or we lose them to another state or whatnot. But we're still a little bit off. But it's been growing at a lot faster rate over the past, I'd say, 7 months in terms of new monthly activity. Definitely, like I said earlier, food and beverage and life sciences have been the two segments or industrial sectors that have grown the most relative to our total share of pipeline. We're seeing comparatively fewer projects in sectors like aerospace manufacturing and automotive manufacturing. Aerospace is no surprise. We do hope that one bounces back, because North Carolina's got a very strong segment there. We did see a nice announcement with Pratt & Whitney on an engine manufacturing facility last fall, but with the exception of that, just not a lot of deals coming from aerospace, probably because the aviation industry is under such a reduced demand from the pandemic. But again, hopefully that bounces back and we start seeing more of those in 2021, 2022.
Yeah, thanks very much. It's interesting that's down, but I suppose it's not. It's down. 10%. That's not a huge amount. So it's really interesting to hear. Subhash, how about you in Missouri? How's your pipeline looking, and where do you see the pros and the growth and the declines?
Yeah, so I would say that. And I'm speaking with a lens of just business attraction, so new companies coming in. Our March 2020 figure was actually higher than our March 2019 figure, if you can believe that. April was a mess, a big drop, just like any other chart that you might see on economic indicators. Every month since then, we've gone up and up and up, and we are pretty much right at par with where we've been, to where we'd say almost recovery. The hot industries have been, and I mentioned this before, but would be food processing would be absolutely number one. E-commerce, fewer but higher impact type projects, and then sort of just general manufacturing. I don't think we saw a single office project in 2020, but we have seen quite a few of them actually in 2021. So that's really invigorating.
How about Justin? How about you?
Yeah, I'd say we're still, off of where we were before, but it was surprising that by the middle of last summer, we saw that uptick really start to pick up. And honestly, our end of year was just as crazy as any other end of year. I haven't gone back to necessarily track, was it 20 projects versus 15, but I know that, we were really pushing it to get deals done for the end of the year. Just in terms of the types of projects, I think our experience has been very similar. The office projects weren't there, say March 15th, March 17th, they started to go away. And we've had a couple come in recently to inquire about the office space. And I think part of it is, I had a consultant tell me yesterday that, you want to buy low and sell high. And that's where a lot of these companies may start thinking, well, there's vacancies. This is the time to get in where I can negotiate. At least it's very much in my favor. And so I'm sure some of them are going to start taking advantage of that very soon.
Thanks. And Tim, how does it look from your perspective?
I think we're in pretty good shape. We're down by about 17%, and that's given some of the incentives that we had taken away over the last few years. So we're seeing, predominantly the most activity in financial services. As you can imagine, a lot are fleeing New York, New Jersey, Connecticut, just from the taxation standpoint. And I don't mean small, asset management shops that are pulling out of Connecticut going to a Boca Raton or a West Palm Beach, but we're talking significantly larger investment banks, commercial banks, asset managers that are doing a really almost a full overhaul of front office, everything pretty much besides the C-suite. So we're excited about that. We always have been. Florida does really well in that space. Counter to what Chris said, we are also seeing a decent amount of aviation aerospace, a lot more aerospace than on the aviation front. But we are still seeing MRO activity in the Panhandle and in Central Florida and Southeast Florida region. So, the only one that I would say really where we've seen a downturn is in FDI. And I think that has to do with a lot of the travel restrictions. Interest was there. I assume that's going to pick up when it is safe to do so from the European and the Asian's perspective, and what those travel restrictions in their own countries that they have mandated. But I think we are in a nice position, and we're anticipating in the next few months to be right back on par with where we would be normally.
Thanks. That's very interesting. It's a great perspective to have from the four of you. We've got about three and a half minutes left. 3 minutes left. I'm going to toss it over to each of you for sort of what does economic development look like in 2022 through 2025? Give me 1 minute or so on where you see things going over the next few years, and any insights that you might have that you think, I really think this is going to be a focus. This is something I wanted to make sure I shared with the audience. This is something when I talk about this that gets me excited about economic development in the next few years. Whatever it is, I'm going to try to glean whatever I can from you. I appreciate you guys being here today and providing us such great information. Since Tim, you were just up, I'll start with you, Tim.
Sure. And I think, Sean, it's going to go down to teleworking. I think the dynamic of the workforce and what it's going to look like is it's going to be a seismic shift for us. I think the pandemic has just laid that out where we can work from almost anywhere outside of your manufacturing operations. And I think once we recognize, and industry has recognized square foot requirements, do we go with a smaller footprint for less space, but more space around the individual for social distancing? Or do we go to a larger footprint to accommodate people in an office space if we go that route? So I think that's going to be the dynamic and the ongoing discussion, at least for the next 2 years, is around the workforce and teleworking.
Thanks. And Subhash, how about from your perspective?
So, kind of going back to the reshoring conversation, I would maybe what I'd like to see is obviously more FDI as part of that reshoring equation. I think we will need to support the supply chain to support that activity. So that's one sort of a concern. And then, it may take federal regulations or subsidies to help some of that. My hope is that we don't have short-term memories and go back to offshoring or choosing other low-cost overseas markets. But I hope we can have sustainability for long-term FDI.
Okay, thank you. Justin?
Yeah, I think, one of the biggest things that we're going to see change is, a lot of our tools were created with a sort of manufacturing office space lens. They're 20, 30 years old. We all modeled it after each other, and it really focused on address-specific sort of incentives. And I think that, the pandemic has exposed what we all knew before, that some of these don't fit. They're not creative enough. They're not well thought out for the 21st century. And I think what we're going to see is a lot more thought and energy, which we've all probably already put in, but ultimately turning into new incentives or new tools to attract these developments that are, sort of don't necessarily throw out the old ones, but definitely are going to be completely different looks to what we have to offer companies.
Thank you. And Chris, you bring us home.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think a couple things. I agree with everything everyone else just said. Maybe a couple additional observations. I think economic development has historically been about marketing to a couple different audiences. One is tourists, to get people to visit, of course, for leisure purposes. The other is about attracting business investment. I do think that with some part of the workforce now untethered to a physical commute or a physical workplace, and I suspect there will be more of those types of people than there have been at any point till now, because of what we've learned in the past year. There may be sort of this marketing push for states to try to attract some portion of that remote workers, right? That's an economic benefit if you can attract these highly compensated remote workers who are now buying homes and spending disposable income in your communities. But that's a very different proposition than either business recruitment marketing or tourism marketing. It's almost a hybrid of both. On the process front, I mean, I think all of us who are in economic development, we really relish the human interactions that we have with clients, partners, even our fellow competitors. I cannot wait for this to be over so we can gain back some of the fun and enjoyment that maybe has been missing somewhat over the past year. Again, I'm thankful for my health and for having a job. So that's a nice to have to get back to where we were before the pandemic. But I suspect we all miss some of that to some extent.
Well, I want to thank all of you for joining me today. This has been terrific. I really appreciate it. And your insights have been invaluable. So thank you very much. And Hannah, I think we are all set.